I'd like to move a motion to move the committee in camera. With that, I move to have the meeting in camera.
Remember when Justin Trudeau said sunlight is the best disinfectant and then went and shut all the blinds in Parliament himself? Well, we're seeing that Mark Carney is turning out to be just another Liberal himself.
In April of 2025, Canada elected a new government. But with that government, they also elected the largest opposition in Canada's history. What message should that have sent Mark Carney? Well, that message should have been that Canadians trusted him to govern, but not without accountability. But since then, we've seen floor crossers, we've seen backroom deals, and Mark Carney cobbling together a majority government that was not elected. Now, they are moving to take over committee and rule with no impediments and no accountability and no oversight. Joining us to talk about that is House Leader Andrew Scheer. Andrew, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Great to chat with you again.
Okay, so there's been a lot of activity in the past, I would say, 6 months since November. We've seen floor crossers. We've seen a lot of overtures from the Liberals to different MPs of different parties. And, suffice it to say, they now have a majority government. And just this week, they've passed a motion to actually take over a majority in committee. What does that mean for Canadians, and should we be concerned?
Well, we should absolutely be concerned. I think you framed it very well in your introduction. When we think about what Canadians wanted, there's one way to tell what Canadians want, that's to look at what they've voted for. And there is no doubt that they voted for a minority parliament. And what that means is that they trust a particular party to rule, but not without some kinds of checks and balances, not a completely free hand. And that means that Mark Carney on election day knew that he would have to work with one or another party. He obviously didn't like that. We now know for the weeks and months that came after that, there was a sustained campaign. There was a sustained campaign of pressure tactics, of enticements, of lobbying efforts to get individuals from other parties to cross the floor. What is so undemocratic about this is, if a political party drastically changes direction or flips on a key principle or policy item, then for a member of parliament to say, hey, this is fundamentally different from what I ran under, you might say, well, that's fair. You might say, okay, well, an MP signed up for one set of policies. Now a political party has shifted. What's an MP to do? That's not what we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with is our leader, Pierre Poilievre, leading our party exactly how he told the membership he would in 2022, fighting for the issues that he told Canadians he would fight for in 2025, where he received a record number of votes, where members of parliament won their seats with more votes and higher percentages than they ever had, where we picked up new seats in parts of the country that had never voted Conservative before. And he has continued on with that authentic leadership style. Mark Carney is who he was, and his platform was the same as well. So for these members of parliament to cross through backroom deals really speaks to Mark Carney's disregard for the Canadian people, for democracy itself. He's deliberately trying to do through backroom deals where voters have no ability to pass judgment on what's offered or what's received, expressly violating what the Canadian people themselves voted for. So we should be very concerned from a fundamental, kind of a first principles approach, that he is now doing something that the Canadian people specifically denied him. And in a democracy, that is not morally right. It's not what people voted for. It's not what they want their parliament to look like.
Over the past few days, we've seen Kelly DeRitter from Kitchener Centre come out and say that at first she was kind of, I don't want to use the word threatened, but she was kind of told, you're not going to make it next time because we're going to run a candidate and they will have Green and Liberal support. And then she started getting enticements to come over to the Liberal Party. And we know she's not the only one. How many members in your caucus have said that they've been approached?
Well, it's hard to say for sure because, it ranges from offhand comments to, more sustained effort. But again, to kind of take a step back and say, for a governing party to use the tools at its disposal, like the mechanics of government and all that the government can do through regulations, legislation, taxation powers, and to use that as enticements to bring over individual MPs. It's just so greasy. It's so it's really caused a lot of backlash of all voters. By the way, I've been around the country over the last few weeks, and people come up to me and say, I obviously people who voted Conservative are not happy, but people who voted Liberal are telling me it's like this is not a good look on my own party. That this is how the Mark Carney has cobbled together a majority. And, it shows that his focus for the last few months, instead of being on lowering the cost of living for Canadians, instead of getting a grip on the deficit spending, on fighting for a tariff-free access to the United States, instead of, undoing the damage to the Liberal Party, it shows that a big part of his focus and attention was just to make life easier for his government. And in fact, that's what one of their MPs said. This will make things a lot easier for Liberal MPs. No longer will they have to watch committees investigate scandals. No longer will they have to actually compromise with political parties to get legislation through or try to find common ground. They'll simply be able to walk into the House or walk into committee and use the majority. That's something else that I believe is very undemocratic. At the very least, the government should have respected the makeup of committees, because that is one of the big checks on a government's power, is the ability for individual members of Parliament to investigate, compel testimony, summon officials. Now that they've stacked the decks on that, they have specifically removed an accountability measure that clearly Canadians wanted in the last election because they voted for a minority of Parliament.
So how is the Liberals having a majority in committee right now different from the 42nd Parliament, which started in 2015 under Justin Trudeau, where they already had a majority?
Right, and again, in 2015 they won a majority at the ballot box, and everybody understood that. And we in the opposition said, of course you got the most seats the Canadians vote for. Of course you're going to have a majority on committees. That's what the Canadian people voted for. So that was legitimate. It was that makeup was fair. But right away, we saw what Liberals like to do. They started to shut down investigations. They started to prevent the opposition from forcing officials to provide information. A lot of people have brought up the SNC-Lavalin scandal during that Parliament and said, well, the opposition was able to investigate that. I said, yeah, but let's remember, it took a whistleblower. It took a cabinet insider to start that whole process. It was Jody Wilson-Raybould herself from the cabinet table, basically saying, hey, there's something really inappropriate going on. It was because of that public attention that I guess, the Liberals felt they couldn't kill it right away. But we had a couple of days of testimony. We had Jody Wilson-Raybould testify. We had the clerk of the Privy Council. And then we had Jerry Butts, the Prime Minister's main advisor. And then immediately after that, the Liberals voted for a motion to shut it down, and they killed it. And it took all kinds of other efforts outside of Parliament. So that is what we're already seeing. The government rushed in the introduction of their new MPs, the new MPs that were elected in the by-elections. Usually new MPs are introduced after question period late in the day. And it's kind of a nice ceremony. They get introduced to the whole House. It's a packed hall. The Speaker welcomes them. The leader of their party walks them up, and it's kind of a momentous occasion. It's always done right before or right after QP, because that's when the chamber is full. What Mark Carney did on Monday was rush them in at the beginning of the day so that they could vote on a motion that was coming up in the early afternoon. That motion was to shut down debate on their committee stacking deck motion. So, the very first thing these new Liberal MPs did was vote to end debate on a motion to give the Liberals their majority. Already we've seen Liberals basically bring in motions to shut down investigations. They're moving in camera. That means to turn off the cameras, to kick the journalists out of the room, and stop their transcription machines. So when they go in camera, for your watchers who follow this kind of stuff, when a committee normally operates, it's all recorded. You can watch on CPAC, you can watch online. The transcript is printed online the next day, and everything that was said or discussed is there for the Canadian people to see. When a Liberal moves to go in camera, what that means is they stop recording what everyone says, the cameras shut off, and every non-member of Parliament or member of the public is basically kicked out of the room. So nobody knows what actually goes on. And this is the very first days of Mark Carney's majority government. They are literally shutting the cameras off, so nobody knows what's being discussed. It's a huge blow to accountability and transparency for this Parliament.
Well, and that was going to be my next question. So, in the Health Committee, I'll just call it that. One of the first things that the Conservatives did after committees were, realigned, it was actually right after a new Liberal chair was elected, was to put forth a motion to call for the Auditor General to investigate the prescribe IT boondoggle that's been going on, since we know that this is almost a Rivcan on steroids at this point, because it's over $300 million of Canadian taxpayer funds, and it has produced a whole lot of nothing.
I move that the committee request that the Auditor General of Canada conduct an audit of prescribe IT, including the costs, governance, termination, transition, and intellectual property arrangements, and B, invite the Minister of Health, officials from Health Canada, and the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada to appear for at least 2 hours on prescribe IT within 2 weeks of adoption of this motion or at the earliest opportunity.
And immediately after that motion, which we've explained to Canadians that when you bring forth a motion like that, there's usually debate on it, but then the Liberals brought forth a dilatory motion to move the meeting directly in camera.
With that, I move to have the meeting in camera.
Since you weren't in the meeting, you can talk about this. Can you just comment for Canadians, what is a dilatory motion and why you think that the Liberals immediately moved the meeting in camera after the Conservatives brought that forward?
Well, that is a great example to start off with, because already there are signs that, you mentioned a Rive scam. We've seen this with other procurement pieces where the government has Liberal-friendly contractors who get big bucks. In some cases, it's been family members of Liberal MPs. In one case, it was actually a former Liberal MP himself who got a big contract. And it's, again, this is the type of thing where if the Liberals have nothing to hide, if the rules were followed and no Liberal insiders got rich, you would welcome the investigation. You would almost, I know myself, if, you would want the truth to come out, because you would want to clear the air and you would want to be able to move forward and tell Canadians, no, when this deal is done or when this is rolled out, you can trust that it was all done properly. What they're doing is they're basically acknowledging that something fishy has happened here because they are allergic to the sunlight. Remember when Justin Trudeau said sunlight is the best disinfectant and then went and shut all the blinds in Parliament himself? Well, we're seeing that Mark Carney is turning out to be just another Liberal himself, because he's using his newfound majority powers, again, not to lower prices for Canadians, not to stop inflationary deficits, not to provide any kind of tax relief or take the tax off gas. He's using his newfound majority powers to hide from scrutiny. So when we debate a motion to invite the Auditor General to investigate Liberal corruption or compel testimony or produce documents, those are called substantive motions, because they have substance. They actually trigger something happening. Action flows from it, or an expression of opinion is pronounced and either adopted by the committee or presented to the House. So those are called substantive motions, because they touch on things that matter to the public. Dilatory motions are precisely the opposite of that. They have nothing to do with a policy position or action to follow from it in the outside world. It just means how the committee is going to handle itself. So dilatory motions are almost always used, unless there's agreement. Sometimes we have these kinds of motions for housekeeping. We're going to set our agenda. We're going to pass a quick motion to, rejig how the committee is going to meet. That's usually done by consensus, and they're usually adopted unanimously. But when a member moves them out of the blue while we're debating a motion of substance, they are basically distraction motions. They are motions that are used to eat up time or to prevent something from coming to a vote. We also saw this at the Ethics Committee. There was a potential scandal involving Finance Minister and his spouse, who is at a Crown corporation that's getting a lot of federal funding on the high-speed rail Alto project. The minister says he recused himself, yet he voted a few times in the House on specific measures to fund basically the Crown corporation that employs his spouse. We'd like to get to the bottom of that. What did he inform the ethics commissioner of? What does he consider recusing himself if he's actually voting on it? And again, the Liberals filibustered right up until they got their majority, came in and shut it down. So motions to adjourn, motions to go in camera, those are what we call dilatory motions, and they're basically there as hurdles and roadblocks to prevent the substantive motion from coming to a vote. So it's a little bit of a House of Commons procedure for your viewers who like to know kind of how the engine works here. But that's what's going on. The Liberals are using their majority powers to shut down investigations, to go in camera, to hide from public scrutiny. And we're 5 minutes into this Liberal majority, and Mark Carney is proving he is just another Liberal. He's just like he's worse than Justin Trudeau on deficits and debt and that kind of thing. But he's just like every other Liberal, using the majority to hide from accountability.
So this is obviously concerning for Canadians. We've already received some emails about this, and the concern is that every time something that could possibly harm the reputation of the Liberals may come up in committee, that it's just going to be shut down or hidden from public view.
Mr. Chair, we have just come out of a motion in the House that has amended the standing orders, and I'd like to take some time to consider this with the committee. I'd like to move a motion to move the committee in camera.
And that prevents the Conservative MPs that are in that committee from even speaking about it, at least anything that was discussed in that committee. So what can Canadians do to let the Liberals know that this is not acceptable?
Well, if you're living in a riding that's held by a Liberal MP, reach out and communicate your frustration. Members of Parliament do track how often they receive correspondence or communications from constituents on any number of issues, and if they don't hear from you, they will assume that they're getting away with it. So step one is very easy. Just fire off an email or write out a quick letter. If you're willing to take the time to actually make a phone call, those really count as well. Let your member of Parliament know. Get your friends and neighbors to do the same thing. Complacency is what lets Liberals get away with things. When they shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, but nobody cares. Yes, we're doing this thing. We're blocking your investigation. We're protecting ourselves. But we're going to get away with it because no one seems to be bothered by it in the outside world. Well, we got to show them that you care. So please, if you're watching this, if you don't like how Mark Carney has put together his majority, and you definitely don't like how he's stacking the deck to protect himself from scrutiny on what he's doing, remember, it's your tax dollars. You work hard every day. You go to work. You sweat. You grind it out. You come home with, in some cases, half of your paycheck or just 60% of your paycheck because of all the taxes you pay. That's the government taking that from you. The very minimum level of scrutiny they can provide to you is letting Parliament tell you what they're doing with their money, with your money. So step one, get involved, reach out, communicate to the media, write letters to the editor, to try to get your local media to see that people are upset with what they're doing. The good news is, we have in the past as the opposition, it takes more work now. There are other tools we have to use. We won't be able to pass some of these motions at committee, but we have in the past demonstrated that when we all put our shoulders to the wheel on something, when we can really show the public through the media and through new media and through our own social media, when we can really get a lot of attention on something, we can break through that. So it changes the way we do our job. But my message is one of don't give up hope that we're still going to be able to hold this government to account and demonstrate what they're doing. It's going to be a little bit more work on our end, but maybe a little bit more work on grassroots people all across the country to help amplify that. But the Liberals, the left, they count on our side getting exasperated or feeling like feeling down about it. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep our head down. We have to just keep plugging away. It just means that we've got to get up a little bit earlier in the morning and stay a little bit later at night. But we're definitely willing to do that hard work in our Conservative caucus.
Well, and that's what we tell our audience, is that despair seems to be the new weapon of the far left. And they want people to just feel, that there is so much effort into holding this government account that it's not worth it. They give up, they stop paying attention. And as they say, when the cat's away, the mice will play. But this is what we say to Canadians, Conservatives, they don't give up, they dig in. And, when things get tough, that just means it's that much more worth fighting for. So, folks watching this, you've heard Mr. Scheer. He's speaking on behalf of the Conservative Party. They are not giving up. They're going to use every tool in the toolbox. And Mr. Scheer should know he was the youngest speaker in the House. He knows that procedure inside and out. And there's a lot of talent in that caucus that's going to be able to ensure that Mark Carney is not going to get away with everything he hopes to.
Absolutely, and things have changed and evolved since I was a speaker. When we were plugging away in the early 2000s against the Liberal government, there we didn't have wonderful kind of citizen journalists like yourselves who helped to tell the story. We had to pretty much do everything through the parliamentary press gallery, and that made it added all kinds of layers and challenges. But the fact that we can kind of speak to a broader audience and in an unfiltered way, and have attention on things that sometimes the mainstream media either doesn't care about, doesn't have the bandwidth to cover, or outright disagrees with our position on it. Sometimes they block us from even getting our message out. So when I was first elected, if I gave a speech in the House of Commons, I would have to wait till the next day, email the IT department. They would email me I think it was an MP4 file, and then I would post it on my website, and then email my list to the link. So now we can speak to tens of thousands of Canadians like this. We can broadcasting. So the Liberals are taking away one of our tools, but in the last few years we've got new tools that have been added to our toolkit. We're never going to give up. We're going to keep fighting and hold this government to account. Thank you for all the work you do on that too.